So, as usual, I start the podcast with apologies because this conversation is some time coming. I first uh, found out about this particular individual and their work through an approach, as often happens, where uh, we you reached out. Well, I'll introduce you first. Mike Porteous, welcome to the podcast, welcome to the Talent Equation.
Thank you. No, I'm happy
Um,
to be here.
yeah, we
Thank you.
you reached out to me saying I'm writing this book. To which point I was like, well done you, because I've still got about four on the go. They're all slowly going to get to the finishing line at some stage, but anyway, I'm um, but yeah, you asked me to sort of read it and if I liked it to provide endorsement, which I was absolutely delighted to do. And then I read the other people who are on. It's like a celebrity catwalk of luminaries from the world of sport and coaching. Lawrence Halstead from the True Athlete Project been on the podcast. Stephen Rolnick been on the podcast. Saw Stephen recently. Jen Co, working with Jen Co at the moment in a
Brilliant.
coach development project. Craig Morris, Rusty Earnshaw. I mean, wow, what exalted company to be alongside. And they all like it, so there must be something good about what you've done here.
uh, well, that's kind. I think it says more about some of those people's generosity, including yours, because you and I hadn't met. Um, yeah, and that's been a super thing. Actually, um, I've found that just having the courage to go out and ask someone, would you mind reading this, which I tend to do in a rather hesitant way. Oh, please, if you could spare the time. And wow, so many people have been so generous. Um, Not just to read and make comments, but to engage in great conversations.
Well, I have to say, I found your kind of invitation, if you like, or request, quite refreshing, which is probably one of the reasons I responded because I don't know, you may not know this, but one of the things that's happened of late, I think, is if you've got a podcast with any level of audience, I'm getting approached on an almost daily basis, usually via AI, or at the very least by some sort of agency that is promoting somebody else because they've clearly done a contract where they're going to get them X number of podcast appearances. And many of them are completely irrelevant to my audience. Some of them are relevant, but the problem is the approach they take is so kind of in your face and you need me on your podcast that I sometimes find it a little bit jarring. And so I'm probably less apt to respond. One in particular that really strikes me as that I can never forget is the guy, I won't mention his name, who is a specialist in the male appendage and in particular erectile dysfunction. I don't know why they came through to me. Can't imagine for a second. Maybe they know that I'm getting into my 50s. And yeah, and wanted to give me all sorts of insights, my audience, all sorts of insights about these sorts of things. It might have been a very interesting conversation. In many ways, I probably should have done that, but yeah, I was one of those ones. So anyway, your approach was far better, and therefore I did welcome it in lots of ways.
That's good. And you
So,
wrote a beautiful, a really, really heartwarming endorsement, which I'm very
well,
grateful.
well, to be fair, you sent me the manuscript, and I was able to sort of, like get into it and and get the sort of sense of what you were writing. It wasn't difficult because once I'd just sort of read, first few lines, really, I thought, hello, we're onto something here. So it wasn't difficult for me to sort of be able to sort of put together an endorsement. Anyway, we've started talking about the book. We'll get back to that. I'm more interested in talking about you. Talk to me about you and your story and your journey and how you've ended up writing a book.
Right, right. Okay. Um, some people can tell these stories as if they're, a nice, clear, straight path. Mine is not like that. Mine is sort of rag bag of different things that somehow or other have led me to where I am
That sounds
now.
more interesting already.
Uh, I suppose I've had three careers now, in a way. I started off as an academic, which one of the super things was that took me to Brazil. I did some work in Brazil. Um, I was also, for quite a long time, a civil servant, which, as soon as you say it, some people go, how boring, paper pusher. Uh, but actually, somehow by luck or by obstinacy or whatever, I was able to get involved in some really exciting developments, sort of big moments of change, like when this thing called the internet was appearing. I was head of strategy for a big government program to get businesses into an online way of working. So, super opportunity to have an impact. Anyway, sorry, I'm going into a bit of detail.
No, no,
Uh,
no, 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 don't worry at all.
on one. Um, uh, and then I took what's very politely called early voluntary retirement, otherwise known as I jumped before there was a chance of being pushed. uh, and at the time, I'd been doing a lot of triathlons. Um, I was into mountain biking. Had a very active lifestyle, um, and living where I am on the south coast with the South Downs sort of within view. I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to set up a business taking people out on mountain bikes? Um, and then with a friend, we set up a business called Zigzag Cycling, um, with this beautiful idea of, like I say, taking people across the South Downs. Um, in the end, we ended up having quite a lot of people who are completely new to mountain biking. And that's where I think I really started getting into a kind of a way of being a coach, of being alongside people who are doing something for the very first time, um, where they're pretty unsure what's going to happen. They've only just met you,
Mm.
and you're out there. Um, uh, as an idea, it was beautiful. As a business, it was a disaster. uh, maybe some clever people can make money from it, but not me. And the business partner I had, he had to leave very, very early on, so it was pretty much me on my own. Um, but one of the key things I got from it was that people would be saying to me, when they gave some feedback afterwards, they said, "Oh, that was great. I've never done anything like that before." And Mike had this way of making me feel confident, and I'd be thinking, "But I don't know what I've done. I'm not quite sure. You know, uh, what is it that's happened out there?" That, and so the more I thought about it, oh, and the other thing, technically, I was pretty rubbish as a mountain bike rider. Compared to some of the amazing tricks that some people can do. I was quite good at falling off, but not quite as good. And there I was in this position of, of trying to encourage people to try quite novel things on the bike, where actually I wasn't feeling that great inside myself. Uh, and again, that kind of brought this thing to the fore of confidence. What is it about? Um, how can you create a space where both I, as the mountain bike instructor, and the person I'm with can feel at ease and ready to try something. Um, but as I say, as a business, it didn't work. So I ended up shifting it to triathlon coaching, and that's what I do now. Um, the business changed its name to Zigzag Alive, and for the last 12, 13 years, something like that, I've had wonderful clients come forward for a whole range of different challenges. Some wanting to get into swimming, open water for the very first time. Others doing big Ironman triathlon events. Um, some looking to compete for Great Britain in their age group. Um, so, really super mix of ambitions and abilities. Um, uh, and back to the confidence thing, as I was going through the qualifications to be a triathlon coach, I kept coming back to this thing about confidence. And I found when you get to the highest level, it's changed now, but in British triathlon, it used to be that you go through the highest level qualification, and you get these amazing kind of scientifically based, very technical um, resources to help you be the best coach that you could possibly be with your athletes. And there's a kind of implicit assumption that really you should be working with elite athletes, even though most of the people on the courses are actually, running clubs with young people. Don't actually have that much interest in the Olympics. It's what's happening with the kids who come week by week to their sessions. And I was immersed in that world as well. For a time I was a head coach at a new club, Brighton Tri Club, that had a lovely junior section. Um, anyway, so there I was thinking, we're getting all this fabulous input from real specialists in specific areas, like nutrition or physiology or psychology or whatever. But then in the evenings, when we're all sat round having pizzas and chatting about what we'd learned, again, we just kept coming back to, in my view, we kept coming back to questions of confidence. How am I going to feel about taking this back to my club? What about the kind of rather difficult relationships that we we were all sort of moaning about and sharing, the difficult clients or the challenging setups we were in, and how can we help our athletes have a sense of confidence, whatever that might mean. And so after a time, I thought, no, I really want to get into this area. I wanted to develop a new thinking around confidence. In a way, sort of going back to the mountain bike experience, I want to find out what it is that was working there. Um, uh, yeah, so I think that's kind of a bit of a zigzag story of how I got to where I am. So I'm now have a private coaching business. I'm doing work on what I now call confidence-centered coaching, which is where the book comes in. And then I do a few other sort of things it's not quite on the margins, but I teach children with disability to swim one afternoon a week, which is like the high point of the week. I do some stuff around mental health, particularly cold water dipping. Yeah. Oh, and mentoring coaches. Yeah.
Um, wow. That's a lovely um, mosaic, I think. Like it, there's some parallels with my own journey as well. Academia, civil service.
All
Um,
right.
well, working for a local authority as a sports development officer is essentially, local authority civil service, and then obviously
Yeah.
working at agencies like Sport England, you're an extension of the civil service,
Yeah.
arm's length body. So lots of kind of sort of that journey with sort of coaching bubbling along as the kind of core theme. Um, Something that I was curious about, or that you mentioned, was you obviously your journey into coaching was sort of is slightly atypical because many people their experience in coaching is they were participants of some level. Usually they've experienced a relatively sort of extensive experience of the activity itself, uh, and then they now naturally want to be able to sort of communicate some of that, and then as a result of that, they then start to look into the way of they're asked often to lead others because they seem to have some degree of proficiency, and as a result of that, they then go on this learning journey about what it means to actually help others learn. And I actually
Yeah.
think that can be quite difficult sometimes. I think the more able you are as a participant, sometimes the harder it is to be a teacher. But in your case, slightly different because you were essentially relatively novice, albeit more experienced than them, but you were essentially taking something that you found great enjoyment from and wanted to help others experience it. And then obviously went on this learning journey of how to help them to experience it, even though you were going through those experiences yourself as a learner. So the interesting thing that I noticed, or at least was curious to ask you about, was I often talk about the notion of being the guide by the side, you know, as a way of thinking about the coaching role, as opposed to the instructor or the director or the teacher, but more the guide or the navigator. You were almost forced to adopt that role by virtue of the fact that you didn't have all of this experience to fall back on.
Yeah.
And yet, I imagine, upon reflection, that's now a bit of a superpower.
All right. Hmm. There's so much in there, I think, which is why I'm pausing. Um, because a lot of people assume that the best coaches had been former
Yeah,
athletes,
yeah.
but I don't know. I certainly don't want to diss
No, no, no.
coaches who come that way. I did have some experience. Uh, Funny, I chatted with Tom Hartley
Oh, yeah.
about this, and that conversation has made its way into the book. Um, uh, when when I went to university, I got into running, but I was kind of middle of the pack when I started, and then just very slowly sort of started improving and kind of self-coached in a way. And I bought lots and lots of books. Um, and then a coach at the local club just came up to me one day and he said, "Would you like some help? Would you fancy some help?" And I was so amazed, so blown away. Said someone showing an interest at a point where I wasn't like a standout super talent. There were plenty of those in the club. Um, just the fact that he showed an interest, wow, that had such a big impact on me. Um, I didn't actually follow all the things that he suggested. I still haven't told him this many years on. But that thing about someone believing in you before you even have a image in your head of how far you can go.
Mm.
And again, going back to the conversation with Tom, I think I realized through talking about it that I was less drawn to the kind of higher profile, highly qualified. more kind of elite type of coaches,
mm,
because they only showed an interest once I was doing pretty well, once I
mm,
got to quite a high standard.
mm,
Um, and again, that there's something different there, maybe in the route I've taken into coaching.
mm,
That one of the people who had the biggest impact did so purely by just showing an interest,
mm,
um, being generous with his time, um, rather than any of the kind of, if you like, kind of technical things of the programs that he drew up that I sort of put to one side. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not I didn't mean to, like you say, I didn't mean to sort of disparage people who'd gone through that route. I think what I was trying to do is I'm always just interested in coaching biographies, and I'm interested in the different routes people take. And there is a more traditional
yeah,
route, which is the ex experienced or elite athlete becoming the coach. And that's sort of the tried and tested model that tends to replicate itself time and again.
yeah,
Whereas the individual who maybe was, maybe a slightly less accomplished athlete, but naturally gravitated towards the support of others and bringing them on this sort of journey, and was happy to do so despite not necessarily having enormous amounts of experience. You said that you were asking people to do things on a mountain bike that you weren't necessarily that comfortable doing yourself, and yet being willing to allow that to take place despite your lack of confidence, knowing that it was an important part of the learning journey for others. There's that sort of natural empathy and willingness to be with somebody on that journey that I think is, it's not a typical story, but one that I think needs to be told more.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. I'm pondering.
I-
It's taking me back to the hills.
I'm curious about you mentioned earlier on about this notion of confidence-centered coaching. Obviously, you've now written about it, and we will get into that. But you in your opening sort of monologue, you were talking about questions of confidence kept coming up. So clearly, that sort of sparked an interest. But when and how did you start to crystallize your ideas around this notion of confidence-centered coaching? So most ideas around coaching tend to center around the human. So it's athlete centered, child centered,
Yeah,
player centered. Um, but, Mark Bennett has spoken about needs centered. Interesting concept, some interesting areas that I'm wrestling with myself. You've centered in on confidence. So I'm just intrigued as to what was the catalyst, and then how did that
yeah,
develop?
yeah. It goes back to the course I was on, that sort of high level triathlon course. Um, and I'd be telling people about, the way I wanted to be a coach. And already I could see it was different to a lot of the other people on the course. And my background was different as well. That was sort of coming through. And then one evening, um, a super tutor called Simon Ward, who has a podcast for triathlon, um, uh, in the bar as things happen. Him and another coach were saying to me, you've got to keep going with this stuff, Mike. It's really, really interesting. You're doing something different here. Um, and so I looked at him and I said, what do you think it is? What is it that you think that I'm doing? And so they said, well, it's kind of well, it's a bit like, well, it's sort of holistic, isn't it? I said, and I can vividly see it. I had the long drive home, and I kept thinking holistic. Yeah, yeah, it is holistic, but that's not a word that is ever going to capture anyone's imagination. Um, what is it, and how can I find a way of expressing it where hopefully people will have an interest. They'll want to say, "Oh, tell us more." Say holism to someone, and they'll go, "Yeah, yeah, we know that. Yeah, yeah, we're all holistic. Yeah, athlete centered. Yeah, that's us." Uh, so yeah, in one sense, I was looking for a way of kind of bottling it in a way,
Mm.
um, and then also could play back these things of previous conversations and yeah, and eventually it came up with the idea of calling it confidence-centered coaching.
Mm.
Um, and the more I kind of explored the ideas, um, the richer it seemed to me, but in a way that just felt right for me.
Mm.
Uh, and as you know from the book, it starts with thinking about our own confidence as coaches, you know, our self-belief. Um, how can we create a space where we're just feeling at ease, where we're bringing the best of ourselves, and the coaching just flows without
Mm.
your head being cluttered up with, these are the 5 things that I should be doing, or um, uh, and on a personal level, that was really important to me to kind of um, to find that, I call it an assured space where I could feel at ease. And like I say, let the coaching flow. Um, it also struck me as really important to think about the confidence that other people have in us. A client coming, um, doing something really daunting. Um, how do I create a place where, or a kind of a relationship where, again, we can both be at ease, and we're both kind of committed to exploring just how good that could be. So confidence in the coach. And then the third element is all about, well, how do I help support people going for some of these extraordinary challenges that come up? Um, and I've just had a thought, it takes us back a little bit in a way to what you were saying before, about do you need to have been really good at your sport in order to coach it?
Mm.
And in the early days, almost everyone who came to me, um, they were um, they knew that I'd done similar events. I'd done a Ironman triathlon. I'd competed at a reasonable level, but then after a time, I found people were coming who were asking for support for challenges that were way beyond anything I'd ever done.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, I think probably one of the most striking was a chap who I'd coached through an Ironman event. And then he said, well, next year I've got a place in the Marathon des Sables, which is this 6-day ultra marathon through the Sahara. There's no way in which I've ever done anything close to that, nor do I have any interest. Um, and so, it immediately takes me to that place and say, okay, so if I'm to coach him, what's my competence? What can I bring here? Um, uh, and ask him as well, why me? There's plenty of people out there who have done such events. Um, and it was quite a key moment in a way for me that basically his response was saying, well, I can find out about, if you like, the kind of technical details. I can read up on stories of what people have been through. That's all accessible. Um, but for a coach, I want someone that sense of being alongside, someone who week by week is going to ask me, "How's it going? You know, how's the trading going?" Um, uh, yeah,
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And when you have an athlete recognize the value of that, that's a sense. I think that's an athlete with a good degree of maturity as to knowing what they need, which isn't always the case.
yeah, 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 yeah. Funny, just last week, uh, I had someone come looking for help to do quite a big swim event. I won't give details to check confidentiality. But at one point he was saying, "Oh, and it's relatively soon. It's not all that much time to prepare." Um, and he was sort of saying, "Well, what I really need is I need a plan that's guaranteed to work. That's going to take me to the end of this swim." And I had to say, "But I don't have such a thing." Um, I'm really excited about the idea of exploring with you how to get you to, in effect, to the start line, feeling as ready as you possibly could be, and I'm really excited about what's going to happen. But no coach can guarantee you that you're gonna get to the end. And again, I don't always see that in some coaches. You know, I see coaches sort of
Yeah.
um, presenting themselves as if they're the keepers of this knowledge, which if you're lucky enough to have it imparted to you, then yeah, you should be all right. And if it doesn't work out, well, it's your fault. You just haven't followed
Yeah.
followed the diktat.
Yeah. 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 It would. Yeah. It's very seductive. The the wanting to be able to have that level of confidence. Interesting, but it's a misplaced confidence, perhaps. That,
Yeah,
oh yes, I can guarantee that for you because what if you can tap into what I know, then I will happily give you that guarantee. I always feel like that's like it's a bit of a red flag, isn't it?
yeah,
Just on the confidence piece, I get drawn to the images sometimes, but you have an interesting image in the book, like a Venn diagram, where you talk about development centered coaching, performance centered coaching, and you place confidence centered coaching almost as the third wheel
yeah.
with the overlap and obviously the sweet spot in the middle of the sort of Venn diagram. I just wonder if I can invite you maybe just to sort of speak to that a little bit because I thought it was really interesting.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay, it goes back to this kind of the journey I've been through, trying to figure out what is it that I'm expected to do as I'm going through different qualifications. Um, Notice the emphasis on the word do, coaching as things we do to other people. And uh, much of it, I think, as like the courses I was on, um, I think of as performance centered coaching. So in general, very, very clear, objective results. You either have got on the podium or you haven't. You've either had your PB or you haven't. You've scored so many goals or got whatever league position it is. Things are measured in very, very definite, finite terms. The actual coaching, certainly in triathlon, increasingly is kind of data driven. So again, hard numbers, objective facts, with these sort of hard outcomes. Uh, and my sense was that if you're in that realm as a performance centered coach, then the way in which you deepen your practice It's by going deeper and deeper into the, kind of evidence-based research, get get more and more kind of scientific in one sense, sharper analysis of tactics, of strengths, in triathlon we talk about, your what's happening to your lactate levels, or your heart rate, or like I said though, I've most coaches actually aren't in that world, although they're taught to, from places that go on about that kind of that sort of model. Most coaches are, they're out there. It's what you call grassroots. It's working in clubs, typically with young people. So the kind of the measures that you work with are quite different.
Yeah.
They're more about things like engagement and fun, and do these kids come back? Do we retain them when they hit adolescence? That's, I think, a big, big issue. And if I want to develop my practice in that area that I think of as development-centered coaching, well, I probably need to get into the stuff about, the learning, how people acquire and learn from experiences, how to use playfulness in preparing. Um, the end results are very different as well. It's more about kind of sport for life, and the change that sport can have, particularly in young people. Um, I, I hope it's clear. I'm not criticizing any one of those, and I've drawn very heavily on on both. I want to be really good in both spheres, but I also think there's that missing element, what I call confidence-centered coaching, where the measures are way more subjective. They're not, you can't quantify them. They're about how people feel. They're about how I feel as a coach when I'm stood there, how easy I feel in myself, how true to myself I'm being, things about self-awareness, uh, the results, again, they may be measured in, yes, I did my PB, or I crossed the line in the Ironman, or I completed that mammoth swim. But it's going to be far more about just that sense of wonder of people surprising themselves with what they can do. And I want to feel that as well as a coach. I want to go away from a session thinking, wow, where did that come from? How did the time go so quick? How did we cover so many things? All these new things came up. It's very, very creative way of coaching, I think. And if I want to develop, as I do, my skills in this area, well, I probably need to look at areas outside of sport. I probably need to look at, who are the leaders in listening and empathy. Who are the leaders in being alongside people who are really up against it, not just in a sporting endeavor, but so that's a kind of a description of the three circles. But you hit on this thing about, and there's a sweet spot in the middle. And I talked with the publisher about this. She said, yeah, we should, expand on the sweet spot in the middle. But that's not it's not where I want to go, and it's not the message of the book. The book is actually saying, how would it be? What if we made confidence the very center of everything that we did? rather than performance or rather than development. Uh, for sure, people come to me and they need some technical input that comes from this sort of performance related world. Uh, or I want to make the sessions that I lead, have a kind of playful element. Um, but fundamentally, I want it to be so centered around what it feels like. How can I be so attuned to what I'm feeling and what the person in front of me is feeling that, like I say, that coaching just flows. It just happens. Um, yeah,
You've you've evoked flow several times, and that intrigues me because I believe I could have been deluding myself, but I believe that I've experienced flow in coaching a few times.
mm,
And usually, coming back to what you're talking about, which is why this is resonating, it's because I was so immersed.
yeah,
Sometimes because things were difficult, or who I was working with, or the group I was working with, were presenting some challenges, which forced that level of immersion, because it was the only place to be. And
yeah,
then, like you said earlier on, where did the time go?
yeah,
Um, and obviously, that's a feature of flow that, time stops and all that sort of thing, or speeds up. And I, I've only ever experienced flow when I've switched off my coach as director, leader,
yeah,
coordinator, manager,
yeah,
and been coach as alongside, in the weeds, hacking through the undergrowth together, forging our own path, finding a route, solving problems, discovering things, making new discoveries. Going back to your point about extremely creative,
mm,
um, you know, um, and so is is there something around flow as central to the confidence message?
yeah, very much so. Yeah, yeah. Um, I actually think of it as fluency,
Ah, okay.
much it's partly because, um, well, yeah, we'll come back to that. But uh, I want the I want to experience a fluency in the coaching. I want the athletes I'm working with to have that again, that their head's not cluttered up with with advice or have to do it this way. Or I believe it comes from people being really attuned to what's happening in their bodies. Um, maybe it's easier in some way, I don't know, but for the sports that I coach, I think we can take people quite quickly to that place. We're not taught to. This isn't anything, any coach education program. Um, Let me give an example. Swimming. Um, people people assume there's a right way to swim,
Mm,
which to an extent there is, and it's very technical. You know.
mm,
Uh, so I could be stood there at poolside watching a group of people swimming up and down. See, and I look at someone and I think, my goodness, they're doing that all wrong. Weren't they listening? Or that's not how we were taught to swim. See? So my head's gone immediately to basically a kind of a judgment about what's right and what's wrong.
yeah.
But if I could stop myself, and if the swimmer is willing to do this, when they get to the end of the lane, I might say, I wonder, would you like some help? It looks to me like you're struggling a bit. Yeah, and then the person might say, yeah, yeah, I just can't get my breath. I'm so out of breath. See? Um, and again, you know, I know what the remedy, if you like, is.
Yeah.
There's a way of breathing that will kind of, in inverted commas, solve that. But unless I can kind of tune in to what that person is feeling, and in a kind of a non-judgmental way, I'm not saying, well, you're doing it all wrong, mate. Uh, but saying, yeah, I can really see that. Yeah, and you're panting when you get to the end of the lane, and or yeah, it looks like quite a struggle. Um, would you like to try something different? And then I say, how about this? Why don't we do the following? As soon as your head's in the water, see if you can, how strongly you can bubble out, and listen out for the bubbling. Just focus on that. Pretend it's a motor. You've got a bubble motor installed, so you've got to bubble out to make the motor get you to the end of the lane. See, or whatever bizarre image might come to mind. But I'm saying, no, why don't you try this? And then they'll try it. 9 times out of 10, a swimmer will get to the end of the lane and then they'll put their head up and they'll say, how did that look? Or, was that right? And I have this very annoying habit of never answering that. They're saying,
Mm.
well, tell me further, how did it feel? Oh, actually, yeah, uh, I'm not panting. I felt more in control. Oh, wow, how brilliant. Let's see if we can take that further, and hang on to that feeling, because the feeling has to reside with the person. They have to own their own right way of swimming, even though there is a kind of what we would think of as a correct way of swimming. Uh, Unless they have that in their own bodies, and not necessarily with any words. They could just kind of root into to that feeling, what it felt like, and then take that to the next session and the next, and yeah, and it belongs to them. Yeah.
Now,
I think if we can do that, then that's where that fluency is likely to happen, or flow. Yeah. It's never going to come by a coach saying, do the following, bubble out this way, or have your elbow up this high, or because that just places a bunch of words in their heads and makes it as if the coach at the end is going to judge whether they've done it right or not.
mm.
Whereas this way, that sense of has it worked? Well, that's entirely up to the swimmer. They'll know that it was easier, that they felt more relaxed.
So you made me think of a quote from a golf coach, funnily enough, called Fred Shoemaker, which was teach. Probably I'll paraphrase slightly, but he separated teaching from coaching. I actually think he probably meant to say that that there's a teaching style of coaching and a something else style of coaching. But anyway, just what you're talking about, I think. And he said that teaching is where you're trying to put something in for somebody else, whether
Yeah,
it's information or whatever, or a movement pattern or something. Whereas coaching, in his view, is where you're drawing out from
yeah,
within them.
yeah,
So it sounds to me like you're very aligned to that approach. And you, well, if I've read broadly speaking, the thesis of the book correctly, that your set one of your arguments at least is that that approach fosters confidence because it's the person who is having the experience and then essentially utilizing you as a verification tool in some respects as to, I think I've experienced this from your observations. Does that look about right, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Or at the very least, they might say you might ask some probing questions which will solicit from them some feelings or some sensations that they may or may not have been aware of themselves. But by placing awareness there, they then begin to become more attuned to the things. And that becomes an extremely powerful learning modality for them. And I talk about this quite a lot. A lot of people default to instruction or teaching because it's snappy and quick and it gets the message across and the person gets something that they can use then and there. But it's fragile, brittle,
Mm.
and doesn't necessarily stay with that person because it's been gifted, so it doesn't have resonance. Whereas when it's something that's been struggled for to a certain extent and has been a personal discovery, it's got way more resonance and power and therefore stays with that person. And that's what breeds confidence. You're
Yeah.
not reliant on an external source for a solution. You're capable of discovering it from yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And an interesting thing, this is going to sound uh, very odd coming from someone who's written a book about confidence. Confidence doesn't actually exist if we think of it as a thing that some
Mhm.
people have and some people don't have. Yeah. The person who has discovered that sense of fluency, I don't know if they would say, "Oh, I feel confident." I think they would say a bunch of other things. Oh, I just felt so relaxed, or I felt at ease, or I felt in control, or so in the book I call it a paradox that I think we can be acutely aware about the absence of confidence. Stuff happens and boom, I'll say, oh, I just lost all my confidence. But we put it into that stark language. Yeah. But I don't think the same is true for, in inverted commas, having confidence. Not
Yeah.
the same kind of, you know, um, what's the word? Sort of definiteness and um, instead, I think there's I'd set them out as three particular types of emotion or feeling. And if I, as a coach, if I can go to those and coach around those feelings, it might be someone at the end says, oh, I felt really confident. Chances are they'll actually express themselves in other ways. And those three feelings, just run through them quickly. The first is a sense of excitement, but not excitement as in, oh, I've got this made, oh, I'm going to get to the end of that big swim because it's guaranteed. Uh, um, I think that's called arrogance, or maybe not being aware enough of the challenge.
Bravado.
It's more excitement, as I call it, a thrilled anticipation of what's going to happen. I am so excited to be here at the start line, ready, and I don't know what's going to happen, but wow, how brilliant to be here. The second is all around control, which is where a lot of the sports psychologists, I think, would probably focus, on are my actions going to lead to the result I want? Um, um, which I think there's a great deal of truth in that, but it also has to sit side by side or have a kind of flip side of having a kind of calmness about the things we can't control, an awareness that I don't know that the result is guaranteed. All sorts of things might happen that we haven't planned for, especially in the sports I coach for. Someone doing an Ironman. My goodness, that's a lot of hours for the unexpected to happen. um, but if I can help people have that sense of we're as well prepared as we possibly can be for the things that we can control, and we have an easiness about the fact that there are some things that we can't control. So I call that a stilling composure. And that's the second sort of emotion or feeling that I think we can coach for. And then the third is that fluency that we've been talking about, where you just lose yourself in the moment. It doesn't mean that it's pain-free, but it can be a real hard struggle, but you still have that sense of, um, um, I'm at my absolute limit and at my absolute best, and I don't know where this is going to take me, but wow, everything is in just this moment here, right now. Yeah, I've had that feeling as an athlete, and and as a maybe not in quite such a colourful way, but also as a coach. Going back to the thing about of going back home and thinking, wow, how did that happen? Where did that idea come from?
Um, I you I'm really taken by this notion of confidence isn't a thing, or confidence doesn't exist if we think of it as a thing. It reminded me of a quote that I often quote when I'm doing skill acquisition workshops, because something Keith Davids talks about is that, and this will seem tangential because I'm talking about skill acquisition, but I think it's very relevant, and I think there's a lot of parallels, but talks about skill, and he actually challenges the notion of skill acquisition, because skill acquisition evokes the idea that skill is something you acquire and you gain and therefore you keep and you own.
Yeah,
And his articulation of skill is actually a continuous process of adaptation. And so he prefers to use the term skill attunement,
oh, yeah,
funnily enough, yeah. And so, and again, the notion of immersion within some sort of context or environment, and the environment evoking this sense of creativity, exploration, curiosity, play, and all those sorts of things, whilst we sort of explore the limitations or boundaries of our capabilities in a safe to fail environment of some kind, and this notion is really interesting, and I'm drawing a lot of parallels from those ideas from what you're talking about. But I also thought that was an interesting sort of, like, there's the other side of that wave. Confidence is not a thing. Sorry, confidence doesn't exist if we think of it as a thing.
yeah,
We know when we haven't got it. And the more we strive to get it, the more elusive it becomes, like flow. Like that sort of meditative state that people try and search for. And actually, it's not something you search for, it's something that comes to you by
yeah,
virtue of the more you lose yourself in an experience, then it can come. But you have to then but if you try to lose yourself, it's illusory.
yeah.
It just gets away from you. So there's an interesting this, and I like the fact you describe it as a paradox, because it absolutely is, um, which is why the terms you're using, which is there's an excitement, there's composure, and then there's fluency as the ingredients of confidence,
Yeah.
and fostering environments that feel where people have that sense or that feeling, and therefore confidence builds and grows as a feature of the environment. That must take quite a lot of thinking through. Where I'm taking you to is lots of people here will be thinking, right, I'm on board, I like it, but how do we get there? Now, I don't want to give away all the secrets of the book, but I'd be interested just to get a few insights.
Yeah. Just to step back a tiny bit. Yeah, I think part of the thing about if we think of confidence as a thing, it actually is quite judgmental. Oh, you really should be. You know, oh, and we better go and fix you. Or we'll put out some easy tasks for you to do so that you can get confident. Get on with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it's certainly not all sports psychologists do this, but there you can see some have this, or in some environments, people say, you know, this athlete got a few problems really. Well, we'll send them off to the sports psych to get fixed, you know, and then they'll come back with confidence. How much richer it could be, I think, if we focused around any one of, if not the combination of those three emotions. Uh, so, you know, you saying about an example, um, the excitement. I talk with the people I coach, not so much about um, achieving the particular, you know, the result that they might have come to me in the first place to gain. You know, I want to do an Ironman. I want to get under this particular time. Um, that is often how someone might come. See? But as we start working together, I want to kind of shift the attention much more to how are we going to make sure that you feel at your absolute best on the start line? Uh, um, and how amazing to be there. But a lot of people I see have this thing of sort of feeling a bit out of place. You know, I don't really belong here. Or I'm not a real swimmer, or um, uh, I'm not as good a triathlete as some of these other people. So a lot of work around excitement, I think it has to be about how, as a coach, we can kind of reframe that to say, you know, number one, you do belong here. This is your space. And wow, is it an exciting space? And when we get there, just lap it up. You're a part of what's going to happen. Uh, and then there's a fabulous phrase from an American psychologist, Michael Gervais, who
Mm.
did a lot of work with Pete Carroll,
Yeah,
and
no,
they
Michael.
they, they talk about living masterpiece. Again, I really like that term, and it's one I use, probably overuse a bit with people I coach. You want to stand there and say, right, the space between the start line and the finish line is where you're going to create your living masterpiece. And not always, but pretty solidly, people get to the end and they're just blown away and say, I didn't believe I could really do that. You know, a guy who's saying, you know, I thought I'd be within this time for the Ironman, and actually I was over an hour quicker. Uh,
Mm.
or maybe, you know, I thought I was going to hate the swim, but actually it was brilliant. I loved it. I wish it was longer. Yeah, your living masterpiece. You know, it's you in that moment, just just at your most profound best and your most easy in a sense. Back to the sense of fluency. Um, yeah. So a lot of it would be around, how we talk about what's going to make for a really brilliant experience. And it's not just going to be the time at the end or the position on the podium or uh, I think Kath Bishop's stuff around, long win is brilliant that way. It kind of makes us rethink what do we really mean by success.
Mm.
Um, Pippa Grange talks about winning deep as opposed to winning shallow.
Mm. Yeah,
Wow, yeah, that's where I want to be with the future of coaching.
I love it. Um, well, talking about being immersed and where does the time go, I've now just looked at the clock. And yeah, sort of 90 odd minutes later or thereabouts, we're the flow has definitely been there. It's been very much a fluent and flowing podcast. Um, I've really enjoyed this. This has been by my bedside for a while, and I've been, just tapping into it from time to time. It's actually been really helpful in conversations that I've had with not necessarily people in the sports world, but
Oh,
others, people who are struggling a little and suffering with, various different challenges or moments of, my children, for example, having, moments of doubt because of various things that are happening with them and all those sorts of things. So I think it's really quite powerful. And I'm grateful to you for the time you've taken not only to write it, but to come and share the insights with me on this on the podcast. If people want to get in touch with you and they, for example, would like maybe to work with you or get you to come and, again, do, share some insights or whatever it might be, what's the best way for them to reach out?
um, um, I've gone off social media
No,
for fairly obvious reasons.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So now pretty much the only place in that world is LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Um, but I have a website that people can look at, which is called zigzagconfidence.com.
Zigzagconfidence.com. I love it.
And I'd be delighted to hear from people. I find I learned so much from people from other sports, from other areas, outside of sports. Um, yeah.
Mike, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for coming on and all the best with the book and all the best with all that you do, not just in triathlon, but hopefully in some other sports with some other
Yeah.
coaches around this notion of confidence-centered coaching.
No, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, good to chat with you.